Yeah, I think I'm recording. Tell me to stop it.
Welcome here today on Telling Our Stories. We've been doing this for about 2 years, I believe. 2 years. We happen to have this the last Thursday of each month. And it's our program to do actually oral history. We invite the public to come and talk about the history. And we've had families before, we've had historians. And just for the record, I just want to say today's Thursday, September 26th, and it's 7:15. We're recording this. And our special guest today, and I know everyone knows Gus Celaya. He's from Brownsville. He goes really back his family with his great-grandfather. Is it Simon or Simon? Simon Celaya that started, one of the gentlemen that started the Rio Grande Valley Railway. And let's give a hand to Gus.
You know, when they'd asked me to come, I don't know, it's quite hard to cover the history of Point Isabel in a coherent way. I might ramble a bit.
We'll let you.
I'm going to cover it from the standpoint of what I know factual, stuff I've read, and what I've learned from other people, and then what I've learned from my own personal memory. I remember the late 20s and 30s here, and then from what I heard from my grandmother, my grandfather, my father. All of them were very involved in Point Isabel. So I'll try to sort of cover all of that. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. First of all, I think we can go back to Point Isabel. It's got a very illustrious history. No question about it. It was the port for northern Mexico. Matamoros became the custom house of northern Mexico somewhere in the late 18th century. Matamoros became the custom house because it was where all the goods from northern Mexico that flew out of northern Mexico to Europe and all points all over the world, and all the imported goods would come into Matamoros. When they came into Matamoros, they were sent all the way to Chihuahua, Sonora, Coahuila, Nuevo León, all of northern Mexico. The reason this port was important, and the port that Matamoros used was this port here, rather than Santiago, because it was the only port between Tampico and Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi Bay was too far north. If you came into Tampico, they'd have to cart all those goods over the mountains into western Mexico. So Matamoros was fine. They could use the river, they could use carts, wagons, horses, mule packs, but they could get the stuff to market. So this port was very important. They called it Frontón de Isabela, Matamoros. And stuff would flow from, be taken off the ships, brought into Frontón de Isabela here, taken over road, over land, to where Brownsville is, and Brownsville was the northern part of Matamoros. Matamoros didn't just stop at the river. That wasn't the border in those days. It spilled over to where Brownsville is. So all that downtown Brownsville, where Fort Brown is, and Elizabeth Street, they had homes, they had Mexicans living there, Mexican citizens living there, and that was Port of Matamoros. And they would bring it there, and they would cross over to Matamoros. Matamoros was a walled city, defended because it was a place that would be robbed because a lot of money there. Wherever the customs house was, that's where the tariffs are paid, the money was collected, the duties are paid to the Mexican government. And whenever there's that much money around, there were always people around there trying to find a way to get hold of it. Well, so therefore, this is a very important village or location going back to the late 17th century. Brownsville was part of Matamoros. There was no Brownsville that was part of Matamoros. And Matamoros was a very vibrant city. They were building, they were making a lot of money, they were putting up all those nice buildings downtown that were being restored today. And the other towns up the river, the other old towns, very illustrious towns like Camargo, Mier, were in Reynosa, the old Reynosa, not the one today, the old town of Reynosa, which was washed out in the flood. They were not very large towns, they were more villages, whereas Matamoros became sort of a real city. They started building the cathedral there and all the other buildings in the late 18th century. It was called Nuestra Señora de Refugio de Refugio. And it had a few other names, so I'm not going to run through that. It didn't become Matamoros. It wasn't recognized as Matamoros until 1827. After the Mexican Revolution against Spain, and after Mexico got its independence from Spain, they renamed many cities in Mexico after famous, very illustrious Mexican patriots. San Miguel became San Miguel de Allende, after General Allende. Morelia was named after General Morelos. Hidalgo was named after the Father Hidalgo, Dolores Hidalgo, um, um, down up the river. Guerrero was named after Vicente Guerrero, another hero of the Mexican Revolution. And Matamoros was named after General Mariano Matamoros, who was a great general of the Mexican army fighting the Spaniards. Most of all these men, by the way, were priests. They were the ones who led the revolution against Spain. And those supporting the poor Mexican peasants because they've been, abused for so long. Of course, that didn't last long. As soon as you got a new government, the well-to-do got over it, got hold of everything, and the poor remained poor. And it hasn't changed much until this day sometimes. It's a sort of a disgrace. But in any case, Matamoros became a very important town. And because of that, there was a lot of traffic through this area here. This was also a fishing village, and supplied fish, to the city of Matamoros. Now, time goes by, and a lot of people start moving. In the early part of the 19th century, people start moving into Matamoros. People come from Europe, from Spain, basically, France, England, Scotland, and northeast of the United States, New England. And a lot of Jewish families come from Central Europe. And they all come to Matamoros to trade as merchants, to import stuff from their homes, to export stuff back. It became very European in character, more European than American. It wasn't Anglo-American, it wasn't Mexican-American, it became very European. These European families were all intermarried with each other. It was in 1827 that Charles Stillman came from New England. His father sent him down here to buy Mexican goods and import goods from New England into Mexico. Charles Stillman was 1827, he was about 17 years old. Didn't speak Spanish, he learned to speak Spanish, and he lived in Mexico for many years, became a Mexican citizen. When the revolution started, the war with Mexico started, he then changed sides and came over this side. At that time, he'd been in Mexico for 20 years, so he was basically a Mexican, and very successful, had a very good business going. During the same time, in the early 1820s, a cousin of my great-grandfather's named José San came over. He came over from Spain, and he came over to see what he could invest his money in. He became a merchant, and he started bringing goods from Spain and shipping stuff back to Spain. And he allied himself with Stillman and some of the other families who were there. Another famous name he came out was John Joseph Young. He came from Scotland. And he came there, and he became a merchant also. And all these families were all working together and living in Matamoros and the Mexican citizens. William Neal was an Englishman. Okay. It's a great story about William Neal. It's a funny story. I'm repeating it. It's not all perfectly true, but it's a good story. So he came over from England as a young man, came to Matamoros. And it was still part of Spain. Mexico had got its independence. And wanting to be part of the community, he became a Spanish citizen. He was an English citizen, became a Spanish. He moved in there for Brownsville on the U.S. side, moved to the house, and became a Spanish citizen. And when Mexico got its independence, he became a Mexican citizen. And he was going along fine, and when Texas declared its independence, he could see what was happening in the future, so he decided to become a citizen of the Republic of Texas. And when Texas, the Mexican-American War took place, and Zachary Taylor came down there, the Americans took over, treated Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1847 and put in the border, and he decided, well, I better become an American citizen. Became an American citizen. Well, in 1861, Texas seceded from the Union. Confederates took over Brownsville. He became a Confederate citizen. In 1865, the war was over. He had to be an American citizen. He was a citizen of 7 countries, and without ever leaving his home. And he later became mayor of Brownsville, and he was very illustrious. A lot of his family still living there. His home is still in Brownsville. It's over in Fort Brown. They moved that over to Fort Brown. It's the Yardley building. So, but you have all these stories about all these families. It was a very, very interesting group of people. There were thousands and thousands of miles away from home. You have to imagine how isolated this place was. It was far from the United States, far from central Mexico. These people lived amongst themselves. All their contacts were with the exterior, or with the interior Mexico. It wasn't with Mexico City or Washington or any place else. And they built quite a life for themselves. It must have been very difficult. In those days, I'm sure with the mosquitoes and the floods and the hurricanes and all that, they went through all this stuff. But they must have had a pretty good life. When the Mexican war with Mexico started, if you look at the map of Tamaulipas, you can see a map of Tamaulipas. It's a long little strip runs along the river, way down like that, and then down here it gets fat and goes down to the coast. It's got a funny little shape. Most of the state of Tamaulipas is between Reynosa and Matamoros. There's a long strip that runs all the way to Nuevo Laredo, or Laredo. And people say, how come they left that little strip running way up there, all the way to Laredo? Well, the truth is, it wasn't a little strip. Before 1845, the border was the Nueces River. And this strip runs up the Nueces River and went all the way to Corpus Christi. So you had Tamaulipas, or it was called Nuevo Santander in those days, New Santander. The Spaniards named it that, came all through here. The families that settled all these towns along the river, from Laredo all the way to Brown, all the way to Matamoros, there were Spanish families from Spain. There were Spanish, Mexican, and there were Mexican, there were Indians. They brought all these families came up from the central part of Mexico. They came up from Guanajuato and all that. And a man named Jose Escandon, he had been given the job by the King of Spain to settle the border along the Rio Grande to prevent intrusion by the French. Keep the French from coming in there. The Spain and France were at war a lot, like all the European wars were always fighting. European countries were always fighting. So they came in to control that area. And I think I've heard of why they put most of the towns on the Mexican side, the Mexican side today, on the south side of the river, because the Comanches used to raid out. Comanches would raid, they get right down the river, they wouldn't cross, but they come down there and they burn and kill everybody on the way. That's the reason they always had a hard time settling Texas. They couldn't figure out why. The Comanches would wipe them out, or the Apaches would wipe them out. And the Comanches and Apaches were quite, they were very fearsome and they were great warriors. It was hard to face them. In any case, the place grew, prospered, and along comes the war, and after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the Rio Grande was made the border. Mexico fought that war, they say. I've heard this, I haven't read it, but I've heard this from other historians telling me. The theory is that Mexico fought this war very hard, trying to control the area south of Corpus Christi. But again, this was the only port. This was the only port between Tampico and Corpus Christi. And if they lost this port, this very important city of Matamoros, the northern part of Mexico would not have a port. They would lose their port. So this is worth fighting for. That's one of the theories. And it makes a lot of good sense. But in any case, as you know, the war was lost by Mexico. Most of the battles were fought here, between here and Matamoros. And they signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The border was established along the Rio Grande. And Charles Tillman went to see a lot of these Matamoros people who owned all this land on where Brown lives. He bought 3,000 acres right next to what Zachary Taylor had taken his Fort Brown. And he builds this city there. He builds out the streets, just like Matamoros, almost a mirror image of what Matamoros was. He even brings people from Matamoros, carpenters and bricklayers to put up all the buildings. They almost look like the ones from Matamoros. So the town starts to develop. And Point Isabel became very important during that war because that's how the American Army received all its goods. Plaza Santiago was a very important place. And the steamboat business had built up. At that time, they'd bring ships into Plaza Santiago, and they would offload them onto steamboats. The steamboats would go around the Gulf again, back to the mouth of the river, over the mouth, and go up the river to Matamoros. There they would sort the stuff out, sort out all the goods, and then on, they'd load them again, and they would go up to Camargo, as far as what's today Bier, which is today Roma. And that was it, as far as the steamboats could go. This became big. I mean, there were hundreds of steamboats. The Stillman family, San Roman family had a lot of steamboats. Then, when you were joined by, during the Mexican War, a lot of other people came. Biffin Kennedy, Richard King. And they were steamboat captains. And they started making partnerships with Stillman, San Roman, and the others. And they had a large movement of traffic. All the goods were coming out. They almost had a monopoly of this. And this became part of business. Now, I'm going to go back to my family. Jose San Roman, realizing in 1846, when Taylor came in, 45, he realized that the struggle was going on. He became very concerned because he knew that if the U.S. Army would come in there, the United States, Mexico would fold. Mexico would not be able to maintain this place. So he decided that he ought to send for a family member to come over and train him to live on the U.S. side. So he sent my great-grandfather, who lived in the northern part of Spain also. He would do a basket. And he said, send him to Havana in 1846. He went to Havana and he learned all the export-import trade, documentation, moving stuff, how all the things worked. Like an education for about 6 months. And then he sent him to Bardstown, Kentucky, to a school called St. Joseph's Academy. It was a Catholic school, to learn English. He was there for a year and a half learning English. And we have some of the letters he wrote to his cousin. It's a dear cousin. He starts on a beautiful name. It's like, dear cousin. I've enjoyed my stay here for the last few weeks. It's been wonderful. The weather's been good. All that kind of things you read. The young ladies here are very beautiful. I've been invited out to many homes. They've been very hospitable to me, and it's been great. And then he starts saying, carajo, in Spanish. So I'm tired of having to speak English all the time. And he goes off to learn Spanish, you know. But he came here. He arrived here either late 1847 or 1848. I'm not quite sure. The treaty was signed. And he went to work for Jose San Roman. Jose San Roman was the Mexican side of Matamoros, and he was in Brownsville. He went to work in Brownsville. In 1850, he became a partner of the business, and then started involving himself in businesses with Charles Stillman, and on the steamboats and all that, became merchant bankers and started supplying funds to people who were building and ranchers and so forth. And about that time, the expansion of this whole area came. The steamboats were big, and all the stuff was being moved by steamboats, and a monopoly was established, basically. And it operated, it was a wild place. I mean, the 49ers coming up the way California came through here. And all that came through Point Isabel. A lot of people landed in Point Isabel. I'll tell you a story. My son was getting married in Denver. And I met my in-laws for the first time. And they were a Jewish family, very nice Jewish family. Been in Denver since 1870, something like that. And he was telling me about how his family come from Russia, from America. And I said, where'd they go, brother? Ellis Island? Oh, no. They went to Port Isabel. They took to Port Isabel. And they came, stayed around for a while, and went overland to Colorado. And that, you have to understand what this was like. I mean, this was really a crossroads. All kinds of things were happening here. If you go into the history of this area, you'll find dozens of names that are very important history. Abner Doubleday, you know who he was? Mm-hmm. He was here for a long time. I mean, what was he doing here? Well, he was stationed here, And then they stationed there, they'd stayed here. Maybe they married here. So something happened. It was a very important area. If you go to the old cemetery in Brownsville, you see all these names, German names, French names, Spanish names, all these old families that lived there. And then they have a Jewish cemetery there. That's very, very important. It's been there since 1856. All these people were the original settlers. Today, I'm going to go today and I'll go back there. I'm not saying if you go back today and you look at all those families, and you see families with the name Cowan. Cowan's a very prominent family in Brownsville. The Cowans are descendants of a family with the name of Cohen, a Jewish family that came from Poland, who married into the it's Englishman. The one I was telling about, the one who had seven citizenships.
Neil.
William Neil. He married in that family. And then that family married into other local families, and they're really related to everybody. And by now, the family is part Jewish and part, for a long time, part Catholic. Then they later became part Protestant Catholics, part Jewish, and they're all scattered. And everybody's involved with everybody. Colonel Rip Ford was also in that family. He was also part of that family. He married one of the members of the family. He was a very famous Confederate officer here, who defeated the Yankees on numerous occasions. And these people all involved in that, and here on Point Isabel, they would all come to Point Isabel. Now, this was where all those people would come in the summer. It was cool here. And they would come here, and they had homes and little places to stay here. And they'd come bring their families over, and they would spend summers here in Point Isabel. And this was going on, and then the war comes. The Civil War comes. Or the war between the states. The War of Northern Aggression, whatever you want to call it. So it comes along.
Depending on where you're from.
Depending on where you're from. And, as you know, the whole coast was blockaded. We blockaded all of the coast, from the mouth of the Rio Grande, all the way up to Maryland. We could not get any boats in or out. So this became a very important part of the Confederacy. This was the only outlet they had to ship out all their cotton and bring all the war goods in, all the goods they needed. They would do this by bringing the stuff in railroad as far as East Texas, maybe Central Texas, and then bring it by wagon to Brownsville. They would put it on steamboats, flying the Mexican flag, These steamboats would go down, and these steamboats belonged to the same people. It's the son of mine, great-grandfather, Stillman, and all these, John Joseph Young, Kenneth King and Kennedy and everybody. These steamboats would go down that river, and they would go down to the mouth of the river, and all the European ships were waiting on the south side. You know. They were waiting there. And they built a town called Baghdad there. And they would go there, and they would load all the cotton on those boats. And the Union gunboats were sitting on this side, trying to get to them, but they couldn't do it. They didn't want to start a war with all the English and French and Spanish and everybody else. So they would unload all the ammunition stuff, come back up to Brownsville, put back in the wagon, and go inside. Brownsville was held at that time by the Confederates. Point Isabel, Point Isabel, and all, and Padre Island and Boca Chica were held by the Union forces. And they were always trying to get into Brownsville, but Colonel Rip Ford, they called him Rip Ford because when in the Mexican War, he was a Texas Ranger, and he was signed as active cadet in the Army, and he took a bunch of regulars with him. He was in charge of, and he was given the order, given the job of writing the families whenever anyone were killed, and the soldiers were killed. So he'd tell them about that they lost their son, he'd sign an R.I.P., rest in peace, Colonel John Ford. So they started calling John Rip Ford. In any case, he was a very ingenious leader, a great soldier, and he was a great leader, motivator, and he had a great cavalry unit, soldier unit. He protected Brownsville. The Union was not able to get in there. At that time, Port Matamoros, the French decided to take Mexico. They said the Mexicans owed a lot of money, so they sent the Mexican troops into Mexico. They went to Puebla. They got defeated. They were defeated there by a man named Zaragoza, who was a Texan, who was in the Mexican army, and he defeated the French in Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo, read about all the time. They took the Fifth of May. Major defeat for the French, but came back and he took Mexico. And Louis Napoleon, who was the emperor of France, Napoleon III, wanted to control Mexico, so he decides to make it an independent country that he could control. And he asked the Archduke Ferdinand, Maximilian of the Austrian family, royal family, to go to Mexico and become the emperor of Mexico. It was wife Carlotta, so they went to Mexico. But to prop them up, you had to keep the big French army over here. So, again, the port, go back here. You had French troops in Mexico, in Matamoros. The Imperial French troops in Matamoros. You had Confederate troops in Brownsville. You had Union troops here in Point Isabel. And outside of Matamoros, you had Juarez troops, Benito Juarez, fighting the French. You had 4 armies and 2 wars going on at the same place at the same time, right across the river. It was a lot of action. A lot of things were taking place here. And if you hear stories that would trade, the French would trade with the Confederates, I need some more cannon, we'll get started, so we get some cannon, I need some rifles. All this was going on. And in the meantime, all the merchants, these same merchants, just keeping their mouth shut, were just moving cotton out to the ships and bringing guns in. Huge fortune. Huge fortune. I was looking at and this was during the war, I was looking at an instrument, a P&L, and a balance sheet. My great-grandfather had it in May or June of 1861, just before the war started. The partners there were Senator Lamont, Charles Stillman, John McCallum, the McCallum Ranch, the city of McCallum named after. John McCallum. John Young had died. This is an interesting story. John Young lived in Mexico, and he was one of the merchants in Mexico. When his business was growing, after Texas became part of the Union, he sent for a friend of his, a Scots friend, to come over and help him, John McCallum. So John McCallum came to work for John Young. John Young then married Salome Bailly, one of the old Mexican land grant families. Had properties all over the place. Father Bailly's family, the same family. Married Salome Bailly, very lovely lady. They have one son. They named him John Joseph Young. And then John Young dies. Salome turns around and marries John McCallum. Marries John McCallum, and they have one son, John B. McCallum, John Bailly McCallum. And both of the boys are raised as brothers, and they split all these ranches up in Hidalgo County between the McCallums and the Youngs. And that's how all that land over there started, and that McCallum Ranch, and part of the McCallum Ranch, the Young Ranch. and up around Lynn and La Gloria and all that. They had lots and lots of property. And their families all grew up in Brownsville. Back to this day, they're all buried there. And I knew most of them. And, you know, John B. McCallum died, I think, in 1921, 22. I mean, it comes back into the century. When John McCallum married Celaya Bailly, the witnesses were my great-grandfather, Simon Celaya and Charles Stillman. That's in the paper. We have documents. I have the documents that show them about that. I'm just trying to tie how all these, you know, it's amazing how these are tied together. The Kings and the Kennedys. These were all land grants here. The Trevino's owned all of this along here, from Matamoros, south of Matamoros, that's where Baghdad is, across Boca Chica, and up this way. And then you had the Baillis, and you had all these families. All this land was perfectly, porciones were perfectly put up, and well organized, and everybody knew how these lands ran. Some ran all as far as the Nueces River. Tremendous quantities of property. But they had been given this to come and settle this area. That was not the most hospitable place in the world to go live and take their family. So the king and Spain was very generous. Now these families found themselves in Matamoros with all this land and said, you know, we lost the war, all that stuff, all our property is now on the U.S. side. What do we do about it? Well, marry some Americans. So Mifflin Kennedy, the steamboat captain, marries Petronella. And she was a widow. She had a widow woman. You know, she already had about 7 children. So he marries her and has about 7 more. And all these families, all these children are intermarried in all the old families in the valley. You know, it's the Starks, the Burns family, all these families all go back to Petronella. You know, they all have Mexican blood in them. You know, I'm very proud of that. So the Youngs, the McCallums, all these families. You know, and so I'm trying to show you how all of this pulled together. How it was quite a community. And Matamoros and Brownsville were very close. It was like one town. They didn't realize the war had been finished. I mean, people would go back and forth. You know, they had the old casinos, the old social clubs in Matamoros. The Brownsville citizens belonged over there, and they'd go there for New Year's Eve and big dances and parties. The Mexicans would come over here. They'd all come to Point Isabel for the summer. You know, the border was there, but not in their mind. They had not, you know, used that yet. And of course, during the Civil War, they all became very low. In 1863, the Union Army, Lincoln gets very concerned about all this traffic going through the river there. You know, he says it's got to be stopped. So he says to General Baxter, you stop it. You were there, and you take it over, you stop it. So they made a big push in the Brownsville. And actually, Newport had to pull the Confederate troops out. And they were losing, having a return. It was one of these battles where they lose fast and had to do something quickly. And all this cotton piled from Brownsville on docks around Fort Brown, and they had to set fire to it and start burning it all. When they burned it all, they burned down Fort Brown, and the magazine went off Fort Brown, huge explosions, the fire started spreading through Brownsville, downtown Brownsville. It's an interesting thing. You go down to the cathedral, the little plaque that tells you about it. Go to the cathedral, and fire was moving up towards the cathedral on 13th Street. You got to 13th Street, the wind shifted. The wind shifted to the north. It was a norther. It was November. The wind shifted, it was a norther came in and blew the fire away and saved the cathedral. And said, "My, I gotta save this." You know, the priest was very happy. But the war ended, and here you were with all this money. All these people had money. A guy named George Breckinridge made such a fortune. He went up to San Antonio, Breckinridge Park, and all that's named after him. Charles Stillman. He got out here during the war because I think he was a price on this yet. He went to New York City, stayed there during the war, pretending to be neutral. Yeah, all this coal factories running stuff back and forth here. His son was born in Brownsville, there on Washington Street, in the house that was Stillman Museum. His wife was Elizabeth Goodrich, and they had these children born there. And the oldest son was born in 1850. When the war ended, Charles Stillman had died, about 1870. He had all this money he made from the city of Brownsville. The city of Brownsville was like a corporation that was selling lots, like a real estate company. They were still selling lots. They're making a fortune with this thing. And with that, and the money he made during the trafficking in arms and cotton during the war, he decided to open a bank. He started a bank called the City Bank of New York. And then he got in business with Harriman and Schiff to build the Union Pacific Railroad and all the other railroads. And then later on, their children married into the Rockefellers, you know. And, you know, they became a very wealthy family. But they just showing all this money from this little area down here. Ends up in New York City, operating, which was back to New York, the City Bank of New York. To what extent, I'm not sure, but that was how it started. You know, they go from there and go up the river, and then they could haul it. The trouble is when they go up the railroad, the other guys wouldn't pick it up there. You know? So they had that railroad going nowhere. That incident failed. Led by my great-grandfather, decided they had to do something because they had no control of this thing. And it was just being looked dry. So they decided to build a railroad directly from Brownsville to Matamoros, coming to Point Isabel. It was not an easy task. They sent off the railroad, the cars, the engines. I think they sent off the 3 engines to be built out of Baldwin work in Pennsylvania. They asked my grandfather, the story that they asked my great-grandfather, what kind of rails were not standard in those days. He said, how wide do you want the rails to be? He put his cane on the ground and said, that looks about right. And that's how they did it. And they had to come across all those bays there, were full of water. And they're not dry, blowing dust like they are today. The water, the bays would go back in there. And they had to build trestle bridges, mesquite. Mesquite can come right across there. And if you come down that road to Brownsville, just before you get to Point Isabel, if you look at it, it's a long line of cedars, salt cedar. You see it there. That was planted to keep the water and the waves from going up against the trestle bridges. That was planted way back in 1887. So the railroad, no sooner built, a big hurricane came. The things were destroyed, and they had to start building the thing again. So they had quite a time starting it up. It was quite an adventure. But it finally got rolling. It finally did all right. And they had trains going back and forth every day. And they built the distance where the railroad would come in. And they had a pier going out with the railroad. They roll the cars out. They bring the ladders off the boats and unload it there. And it was a very good business. Then later on, a lot of the families from Matamoros and Brownsville decided to build their homes down there and had summer homes there. And they would come down with all the families and all the servants and all that and spend the summer in Point Isabel. And the men would go into town every day. They would go into town in the morning and would come out in the evening. They were commuters. We used to kid them because, we all have families that we don't recognize, have our names, they're not really, they don't look like us. And I think that was the way they had birth control in those days. The women said, okay, I've had 6 children, no more. She'd sleep in the other room. And so they would have their girlfriends, they would have their girlfriends back in Brownsville. They'd call it casa chicas, little houses. And this, I'm telling you, this is very typical. I think the women knew about it, but said, we'll just put up with it. It's better than have to put up that old guy. I'll get tired of it. Mess around with it. But anyway, it worked. And the cities prospered, but then they started having plagues. They had a lot of plagues, malaria, yellow fever, hurricanes, and it killed a lot of people. A lot of people died in the 1880s. It was a very rough time. And they built the railroad from Corpus Christi, Laredo, to Monterey. And that shortcut this whole area down here. So this area went into sort of depression. It was a local business, and there was still business here. Because Matamoros was still a wealthy town, bigger than the others, but it wasn't like it was before. And this town, everything survived. The place, people went along with their business of fishing, were out here fishing. The people from Brownsville and Matamoros would still come down here, and the ships would still come into Brownsville, Santiago, and the railroad was working, and it was profitable. My dad tells me he was around in the 1890s. That when his kids, they would get on a flat car, and they would come across the flats, we call them the flats. And there were so many ducks and geese in those days, unlike anything that you could ever see today. Even when I was growing up, it's hard to describe what it was like. We had so many ducks and geese growing up. The sky wasn't black, but we were just all over. So they'd go on the railroad car, and they'd go there, and they'd stop, and they'd shoot up ducks and geese. And they'd get the things and put them there, and come here, and they'd clean them. And that's a job cleaning, my friend. You had to have help at home. If I came home, my dad came to my wife, my mother, and said, here's some ducks and geese, clean them. He said, no, let somebody else clean them. Don't bring them home unless you clean them. You sit there and pull those feathers. It's quite a job. But there's nothing like a wild duck or wild goose. They have a flavor that you cannot compare. It doesn't compare to the domestic stuff. They were delicious. But that's what they did. So everybody used the train. I mean, everybody enjoyed it. And in 1900 came around, and they started doing improvements in Brownsville and in Point Isabel. In Brownsville, they started paving the streets and bringing electricity and putting in all the new things that were available. My grandparents had put in the first indoor toilet. When my grandfather heard that we put an indoor toilet, he said, "Not in my house." She had just come from Washington. She'd seen one. She thought it was a great thing to have.
I guess.
Had a little side story there for my used to kid, my Uncle Clarence. He was a young kid. And they built this about 1903. They had this big old house in St. Francis Street, and didn't have a room for a bathroom, so they cordoned off part of the hallway upstairs, and they closed it in, and they put a sink and put a big water tank on top of the house. And this water would go down into the sink, and they'd wash hands. They put a tub in there, and they put this crapper, Thomas Crapper unit, and they put it on top. They had to build since the pipes had to go out. There was no way to put them on the floor. They raised it. They put up another floor of a little shelf. What do you call it? Not a balcony, a little shelf, like a wooden shelf, and had to sit on top of that. And the pipes went in there outside. They went outside and went downstairs. And that's what they used for the surge, and the water would come in the top. Over the top of the crapper, the top, they had a big tank and had a chain on it. And you pull the chain and flush the whole thing down. Worked very well. Well, anyhow, my grandmother was very proud of this, and she had a tea. And she invited all the ladies in town to come for tea, and they all had to use the crapper. Uncle Clarence was out there, and they had a pump of water. They had a big tank down below. They had a big tank down below, and the piperos were these Mexican Americans who had these donkeys, and they had these great big barrels. They load the barrels with water down to the river, and they bring these down and use that water for washing. The cisterns were used for drinking water. You know, they had cisterns for rainwater, direct rainwater too. They bring these things and they put them in there. And he had to sit there, and every time the water went down, he had to start pumping. He said he was out there pumping all afternoon. Keep the thing ready. He kept flushing and flushing and flushing. But it's a very modern time. Anyway, these people all having a great time. They thought life was a great time here, you know. An interesting thing, all these people from Brownsville and Port Isabel, all these old families of Champions, all of them, they're all related. They're all married. The Champions blood is in fact in every family in Brownsville. There's not a family that doesn't have a Champion blood in it. Or in the rest of the valley too. Now they're spread all over the valley. There were 5 Champion brothers, and they were very prolific. Anyhow, they're all education was very important to them. To give you an idea, my grandmother in 1880 went to school in Nazareth, Kentucky. The equivalent of junior college education. She went with all her sisters went there. They all followed one the other. There's Dalzell and all these other ladies in Brownsville all went to school there. They would take the boat. They'd come down to Port Isabel, take the boat to New Orleans, take a steamboat up to Louisville, and go to Nazareth. Because remember, most of those people were all Catholics, you know. They go there, and this was a convent there at Nazareth, Kentucky. And they all went to school there. And there they learned all the things that, you know, they had to do to teach school. Annie Putat, you know, it was Annie Putat. It's like the first school in Brownsville. The first school's named after. They learned, English. They learned reading and writing, literature. They learned music. They learned how to sew. Learned all the things that a young lady should know in the junior college. But they learned history. Learned a little bit of geography. They learned all this stuff, and they came back quite prepared after 2 years. But they were gone for 2 years. They didn't come home for 2 years. When they came back and started teaching school. But they got married. My grandfather went to Spring Hill College in 1878. Spring Hill College is in Mobile, Alabama. It's a Jesuit university. It was founded at the same time Georgetown was founded, but it was a Southern. And he went there and got his degree there, and then he went to the University of Virginia and got a law degree. And this again, he came back as a lawyer at the University of Virginia in the early 1880s. And you can go on like this family. I'm telling you about these because I'm very familiar with it. All these other families down here all had this education. A lot of the Champions, a lot of the others were educated. They went east to go get their education. And so it was an interesting group because you had people here, and then you had the cavalry. Of course, you had the army stationed here. You had the army here, and all those officers were West Pointers, you know, and they had been all over the place. You had 2 different cultures, the Mexican culture and the American culture. And then you had all the Spaniards and Frenchmen and all these other families all in here, mixed together, and people coming and going. So it wasn't a boring community. You know, they played bridge, cards, and they played all these games, and they had reading clubs, and they read everything. They had debating clubs, and if you read all those things, there was always something going on. They had theater. They had house. They call it opera house. I don't know why all these places were called opera houses in those days. You know, there were vaudeville places and other places for entertainment, but they're called an opera house. They had one there on Levy Street. So there was a lot going on. And they built very nice homes, and they all loaded, very Victorian in style. That was the style of the day. So these three towns, you know, lived around each other: Matamoros, Brownsville, and Point Isabel. And they all, it was very closely related in business, socially, and everything else. And all this worked very well up in the early part of the 1900s. And in 1903, the Stillman family and other Uturias and other, you know, the St. Louis Brownsville Mexico Railroad, which came from St. Louis, came down into Brownsville. They built a bridge, the old bridge that goes across the Matamoros in 1905, and then they crossed there and went down to Monterey. So now we had a railroad connecting us to east. And they sold the Rio Grande Valley Railroad, what is called Rio Grande Valley Railroad, to the St. Louis, Brownsville, and Mexico Railroad. And my grandfather, I think, went on the board of the other railroad. But they continued to operate. They continued to operate. I think it operated in the 1920s. And it was quite a while. There's a very important thing here. William Neal. William Neal, I'll tell you about. You know, there used to be a lot of political fights here. He didn't. There weren't not Republicans or Democrats as you know today. There were Republicans, I guess, after the Civil War. E.J. Davis was from Brownsville, the lawyer in Brownsville, who had voted against secession. Of course, he got run out. He had to leave, had to go to Matamoros. It was interesting. I'll tell you about this. All the families here in Point Isabel and all that, when they seceded, they had to get out because the Union Army was coming. So they went to Matamoros if they were secessionists. But in Brownsville, all the Unionists went to Matamoros because the Confederates were in power. And when the Yankees took Brownsville, then all the Confederates had to go to Matamoros. There was nobody left in Brownsville. I mean, they were just vacant. There were no people there. You know? So they called, if you read the dispatches, after Fort Brown was burned and destroyed in that part of Brownsville, the dispatches from the Yankee generals talked about Barracks Brownsville, because they would put the people in all the homes, all the empty homes were down, put all the troops in. By the way, the old City Hall in Brownsville was the headquarters of the Union Army. And they declared that the state capital of Texas, you know, occupied Texas, became officially, by orders of Abraham Lincoln, the state capital of Texas. And that building was the state capital of Texas for about 9 months, the Union capital of Texas. So, I'm going to have to skip back to this. William Neal. William Neal was very active in politics, as were all these other families. You know. And when the war ended, you know, they were very upset because the Yankees weren't doing the job and keep peace. And they were all the time fighting about the Reconstructionists and all that. You've got to remember, Brownsville and Point Isabel were not slave areas. There were no slaves here. You know, they were free areas. I mean, you didn't need slaves. You had all these Mexican Americans doing everything. You know, slaves were just not welcome. They're not needed. So, and New Mexico was against slavery in those days. So they had never, you know, asked for slavery. They never wanted slavery. So the party finally broke down into really a Democrats. The Democrats took over. But not being happy with Democrats were in, you had to have fights. So you had the Blues and the Reds. And the Blues and the Reds would always fight each other. And they split along business sides. They never got mad. They were friendly and even the same family. But, you know, in politics, they hated each other. So the Rio Grande Valley Railroad, Point Isabel Rio Grande Valley Railroad, went down to where the Cameron County Courthouse is now. All that area was the roundhouse, and that's where the railroad station was. They could not go down to the river because William Neal and his group were trying to protect, you know, the things, the Kennedys, and they didn't want to compete with the railroad, with the riverboats coming up that way. So wouldn't let them get down to the river to unload the stuff. They made them stop there and have to haul it down 12th Street in Brownsville to get down to Point. So they built started another railroad company. And this was just, they laid the tracks down 12th Street and put railroad cars, and they pulled it by donkeys or mules, pull it down the river to unload the stuff. And all this going on with people who knew each other and were still to each other, but you know, they just all were fighting each other in business. And Point Isabel was still doing well because everything was coming through here. So Point Isabel was a busy place. You know, when you think that many trains and all those ships coming in, all that taking place, it had to be hiring a lot of people, you know, what we call stevedores and all that. laying the railroad, all that. It was a very busy place, and you had the fishing. Well, when I came along in the 1920s, Dad was working for, went to work and helped organize the Portisville Land Company. Portisville Land Company was set up in the 1920s by a group of people from Oklahoma. You know, John Sherry was setting up Sherryland. You had W. Stewart, set up W. Stewart Land Company, which is Westlacote, and all Stewart Place, and all these places were being set up. My mother's family, the Beretta, set up Beretta, all that stuff at Russelltown today, all that, the river, the Valley Brittany County. Everybody was building, you know, land development schemes to bring people from the north, mostly from the Chicago Midwest area, to buy properties, citrus properties. These citrus properties, you know, were very valuable. They would build their homes there. And Portisville Land Company was built around Bayview. And Bayview had been the old box ranch, had belonged to Jose San Roman. That's the road going out there is called San Roman Road. Now, Jose San Roman, when they came to Dad, this group representing this group from Oklahoma came to Dad, he said, "You're related to Jose San Roman, he's in Spain, and your family, the Texas Bank and Trust Company, which is on Elizabeth Street, belonged to the Celaya." So Joe Celaya, my dad's cousin, was president of the bank. He came to him and said, "Look, do you think Jose San Roman will sell that estate?" And we don't know, we'll find out. We'll suggest that he doesn't. So it sent Charles Celaya, who was a younger brother, to Spain to see if he could close the deal. He closed the deal and came back and made it. Charles Celaya, daughter Patricia Celaya, lives here on the island, and she was the controller at the University of Texas in Brownsville. And she wanted to teach school, so she couldn't be a controller, and is now teaching school there. But she lives in the island now. But anyway, Charles Celaya went over. He's a big football player at the University of Texas. He was about 6'6", and we had about 220 pounds. Simon Celaya had come in when he came here in 1840. He was 6'4". We were big people. I was always the smallest of all my cousins. I was the smallest of all the boys. But anyhow, they come down here and they set up the Portisville Land Company. They buy all this land in Portisville, and they built all these waterways that you see all over here. They built all these waterways, and they put these streets in. The streets as they are right now. And in between the streets, back in the 30s, I can remember they had the foundations for buildings that never came up. Never came up. And John Sherry built the yacht club. And they built the clubhouse in Bayview, which CP&O owns there. And that all the homes were being built there. All these people were coming from Oklahoma building homes there. And Mr. Carroll, who was the president of the operation, and my dad was a sales manager. And it was a going gesture. They were making money. People were coming down. It was a beautiful place. And what they would do is bring people down trainloads from Chicago. Over the weekend, they would arrive in Brownsville Reserve Pacific Station Monday morning. We had about 50 touring cars, all driven by famous families in Brownsville. Wilbur Wright, Dean Porter, all these, young Larry Leitner, all these young men would go down with the cars. These were good jobs, and they would take these people out to Bayview. They put them in these cars and take them out to Bayview. They get to Bayview, they go in for it, get in their rooms, assign their rooms, they would go there and get cleaned up, freshened up. Then they would come out for a meeting. And it would be orientation. When you're here, this is what we're going to do. On Monday, we're going to show you around this place, and you rest and take it easy. On Tuesday, we're going to take you up to Baker Potts and Hardinger. We're going to show you the nursery where you get stocks, how the stock comes from. Then we're going to take you to tour some of the other land development places up the valley. On Wednesday, we're going to go fishing, not Point Isabel. On Thursday, we're going to be going hunting. Because we've a lot of things hunt. On Thursday night, we're going to go to Matamoros and have a final party in Matamoros at the, I think we're in the restaurant for a second. But anyhow, it was a restaurant on the square. And then Friday, we'll come back, we'll sign you up. What do you want to buy? And everybody, they had these people pretty well picked out before they got up. I mean, these people came down seriously wanting to buy. And they saw all these lots. I don't know, $5,000 an acre. I can't remember. I think that's what I remember, but I'm not sure. But it was expensive. Very expensive in 1920. But everybody had a lot of money. 1927, 28, 29, a lot of money before the banks were bust. But another thing happened in that period. It was such a successful operation. Of course, we're developing Point Isabel too. With all the lots and all that. We're going to sell all these lots, put all these lots in and everything. And then a man by the name of Ansel from Chicago. was pyramiding all the utility companies. He would buy an utility company with money, he would buy another utility company, and pyramiding all these companies. Mr. Ansel decides to diversify a little bit, so he sees all this operation and making so much money, so he decides to buy majority interest in the portable land. And it was very successful. And I remember as kids, we'd go to Chicago every year. We'd visit Chicago, visit Mr. Ansel, and Dad would give a report how the sales were going, and we'd go out and visit other people, try to recruit more people to come down here. And we'd stay in Chicago at the Drake Hotel. I mean, I was 5, 6, 7 years old. I mean, this is not, I can remember that. The Drake Hotel, and we'd go down to see Uncle Brown. I don't know what the first name was. It had, it was down in Indiana. And they had a horse ranch, standard horse ranch, standard red horse. And the sulkies. And we'd go down there and we'd stay at his place. And I remember once they took me to the memorial for the drive on the Indianapolis Speedway, for Indianapolis. And I remember I hear zoom, 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 zoom. I was fed up with it. But we'd stop in St. Louis, and Mother would go shopping in St. Louis, and we'd take the train up there. It was a great train here. And then my sister came and I stopped taking us. I figured one's enough, two's too many, and I didn't go back until I was an older person. But it was a great life. This thing was extremely successful, very, very profitable. My dad had 2 Pierce Arrows. You know what a Pierce Arrow is? We loved automobiles. We had a great life, and things were going very well. Now, the whole country was in a depression. The depression had started. Things were not good. This company was booming. In 1933, terrible thing happened. They called Dad early in the morning, tell him that Mr. Ansel had skipped the country. He had pyramided all these companies and everything collapsed. Corporate, really like we have today, And of course, the whole thing went into receivership. The Dad's stock and all the other stock, all the receivership, they had nothing. And the company was taken over in receivership by the utility companies. And Mose Hill was sent down to Launcey Hill Jr. Launcey Hill Sr. was a law partner of my grandfather. Launcey Hill Jr., Mose Hill Jr. was appointed receiver and for the utility company, Central Power and Light, to come over and take over the baby thing and start putting it all back together again. And that's how all that started falling apart. So no more development was made here in Point Isabel. And things here just came to a halt about 1932, 33. But we kept on coming to the island.
That's a question at this point. At one point, Launcey Hill owned the lighthouse.
It's possible. I didn't know that.
Would have been in this deal?
It may have come through the Port Isabel Land Company. It may have the Port Isabel Land Company bought the lighthouse because it wasn't operating at that time.
Then he turned it over to state in the 50s.
Yeah, it's very possible. I'm not sure. I know the lighthouse was inactive during the 30s, and they had the lighthouse off Padre Island.
Right.
The lighthouse at Padre Island burned.
That burned down in the 40s.
1939.
Right time the war started. But we would come down here, then we knew everybody in Point Isabel. I had an uncle of mine, George Scanlon, who was mayor of Port Isabel, and he had his fishing boats. Mr. Hockaday, Dr. Hockaday, he was the mayor here, my friend of my dad's. They didn't agree on fishing, but we're good friends. My first cousin, Dorothy Fox, married Dr. Hockaday's son, Ben Hockaday. So we're, again, we're all getting related, And Mr. Burnell had his fishing company, Brock Sloan, I can remember some others. I would come down with Dad. Dad got in the legislature, joined the legislature of Texas in 1930 thereabouts. And he loved politics. And he got elected overwhelmingly. He never had any problems. He could just pronounce and he would get them. But he had the people of Port Isabel, except Mr. Hockaday, would all vote for him.
Doc Hockaday would vote for him.
Doc Hockaday, they were friends. They wouldn't vote for him because Dad, because Doc Hockaday, along with a lot of other Dad's friends, Jim Batzel, Browns, all the others, and Jim Batzel's son married another cousin of mine, Bob Newman. But they all wanted to shut down the bay, stop all these fishermen from fishing down there. Because, they wanted they organized a sports fishing in the valley, and they wanted to shut down the bay. And Dad says, no, you can't do that. He says, I grew up with all these people. He knew every fisherman along, we used to go along the quay over there, along where all the fishing boats were. Yeah. And he'd stop and see everyone. We'd go and have lunch with some of the families, and he knew them all, big abrazos, they knew him, and Augustin, he knew everyone by name. And he says, if we shut them down, how are they going to live? This is in the 30s. There's no income for them. I will not shut it down. Well, they said, we're going to fight you. And they did. They raised a lot of money. They fought that, financially, but they voted for him because they liked him. He never lost an election. He won big time. But he would not shut down the bays. And I'll never forget, one time there was a big argument going on. They said, they've shut all the bays along the Texas coast, except for this one, Cameron County. And we have to shut it down. That's it. Why? Because the fishing's no good on the others. This is the only one that has any good fishing. Because these Mexican fishermen, have been fishing here for 200 years. They had to take care of it. They go out with their boats, and they would go out with their boats. And I used to go out with them. I learned to sail on these boats. I'd go out with them. We'd go out on these boats, and they'd pull the nets in. Fish was too small to throw it back in. They wouldn't keep it. They just brought in certain fish. But they tinted it like a garden. They did a good job. But they did have their nets out across it. And the sportsmen didn't like it because, you go running along, you run into a net and mess everything up. So anyway, this was always a fight. They keep the bays open. They wanted to close the bays. And this continued up until about 1948. Dad got out of politics. Met Murray was going to run. And Met was a good friend of Dad's. And Met says, Augustin, I promise you I'll keep the bay open. He said, if you do that for me, I'd appreciate it. Now, there weren't that many votes here. This wasn't a big vote here. It was just a matter they thought was a moral responsibility to keep the bays open so these people could work. There was no other work for them. One person suggested, so when they close them down, let them go up to Michigan and pick cherries and go out and work in the fields up in Colorado. They don't have to be here. But but for Dad, it was a very, very important thing. He also said that these people had been taking care of the bay. That's the reason we had more fish here than they did anywhere else, because they did a good job of it. Well, Met gets in there and he keeps the bays closed. But in 1950, the second term in there, the pressure got so, and this is according to Betty Murray, his wife. Yeah, Betty's a good friend of mine, she says. So the pressure got so bad that he said, well, he gave in and passed a bill to close the bay, the commercial fishermen. Now, it actually didn't turn out so bad because by that time, all the shrimpers were coming from Louisiana. They were bringing all the shrimp boats and they were hiring, they were all going to go work there. So they were able to make a transition to the shrimp boats, and the place didn't go under. So that was the end of the fishing on the outlet. And those boats were beautiful boats. I mean, sailing on the scows, those gaff rig scows, they could move them around. We had a centerboard. And you get the shallow to raise that centerboard, and you get on a reach, that thing would fly. You just fly along. They're flat bottom. They're great things to sail. And they used to let me sail the boat. I'd get the helm and I'd sail the boat. And every now and then they'd chew me out because I'd done something wrong. But we enjoyed that so much. I used to have so much fun. I remember when we graduated from high school in Brownsville, I went to St. Joseph's Academy school, and we didn't have a big class. We want to have a class picnic out in the alley. So I said, okay, we're going to go out and arrange to go out there in boats. So we took the boats down to Port of Brownsville. We all got in from the Port of Brownsville, and we sailed up, and it was tack, 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 all the way up. All the way up to the, we got to the bay, and then went beached the boat, and we carried everything across the island, all our camping equipment. We stayed there for several days. And then went back in the boat. Going back was fine. It was a big sail right back in. But it was a very beautiful place in the 30s. So you come down here, and there was a place called Carlos's Cafe, and Carlos's wife had worked for my grandmother, and she made oysters brochet. And it looked like a toothpick with the oysters, and she'd light fry. They were the most delicious things in the world. We would come all the way from Brownsville, have dinner at Carlos's, and bring my grandmother. And that meant going up, the Paredes Line Road, those Fresnos. There you couldn't see a light. There was nothing. I mean, it was just total darkness, We'd come to Point Isabel, we'd go there and have dinner. Of course, everybody knew everybody. Dad would bring me to Point. He'd come here all the time, and I think every time the finance would come see the bad times back in the 30s. He'd go see Miss Burnell and Brockstone, say things are tough. You better give me somebody to fight the thing. But it was a great place. We'd go down there all along where the fishermen were, and they'd bring oysters. The oyster boats would come in from across the South Bay. They'd bring all the oysters, and they're sitting there shelling the oysters, putting them in these little quart bottles, like quart cardboard containers, like ice cream used to be packed in. They'd fill them on, and Dad would get a whole quart of that and a couple of pints. And we get in the car and we drive back and go down the old Point Isabel Road. And have it open. They say, okay, Dad, let's give me one. We'd eat oysters all the way home. They were the best oysters in the world, and the fish were outstanding, which is great fish. It was just and the people here just were lovely people. I mean, there was no crime, there was nothing. And when the war started, all these folks went into the service. They were wonderful families. I wish I could, you know, tie in with them, but then I left. And when years went by, I was gone 35 years, and I just lost contact with lots of that. The whole thing changed. I was here when they built the causeway, and after one of the parties, he decided to go swimming, but didn't have a swimsuit, so he just went in the shorts. And the story was all went around, big scandal.
Yes.
But he was an old gentleman in his 70s. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. We had a couple of motels over there. Harlingen built one, Shady Retreat, I think it was called.
Sandy Retreat.
Sandy Retreat.
Yeah.
And then they built all this county built all the other stuff, and the whole place changed. I remember, I'm trying to think of Young, first name was Young, he worked for John Tompkins. They didn't have the college.
Oh, it was his son-in-law.
His son-in-law.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of his first name.
Not Frank, that was his son.
No. Anyway,
Yeah.
I was with Jimmy Buckingham. We were there at the Jimmy Buckingham in Brownsville had a place there. We sold all kinds of.
Lawrence Young.
Lawrence Young.
That was it.
We sold all this, you know, TV sets. TV. Not everybody had TV sets. It started a big TV shop that sold TV sets. And I was sitting there talking to him. That Oscar Hensley had a lounge, some lounge next to a beer place. A lounge was a beer place basically in those days. He'd call them beer places. You know, you could charge 20 cents more per bottle if you called them lounge. Anyway, we were there, and Lawrence drops in on us, and he said, "What are you all doing?" I said, "We're just sitting here, just had lunch. Just one afternoon, a little lazy afternoon." He said, "I'm going to sell you some lots in the island." Lots in the island? They're crazy. He said, "No, you get these are $200, $300, or, you know, very relatively inexpensive. I mean, to us it was a lot of money back. You know, you're talking about early 1950. They hadn't built this causeway yet." And I said, "Larry, we're not going to buy that thing. What are we going to do with those lots?" He said, "We're going to build a causeway." I said, "We'll never get that causeway. We've been talking about forever." He said, "No, we're going to sell you these lots." So we told him, "We're not going to buy any lots." He said, "Look." He said, "Why not?" He said, "I don't want to get involved in payments. I don't want to get involved in anything." He said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. If you buy 5 lots on the beach, you buy these other 5, there's a block of them. If you and Jimmy buy these lots, give me $25 down, you know, and we'll put it in your thing as you're purchasing those lots." I said, $25? Well, why should I give you $25? I mean, I've never seen the $25. He give me $25 and we'll do it. So he bothered us so much, we gave him $25. And we tied up these lots. I had 5 beach lots and Jimmy did too. And I forgot about it. I really forgot about it. He said he's not going to bother us or anything like that. No time he's going to go back. Forget all about it. Well, I got called back from the Korean War right during the middle of, just before we harvested cotton. And I took a huge beating, you know. I wasn't able to harvest my cotton. I took a huge beating. I came back with lots of debt. The bank stopped me. It started again. Then it didn't rain for 3 years. The drought got so bad that I finally owed so much money. I'm not going to tell you how much money. In those days, it was a huge fortune. I decided to leave, so I went to New York. And I got a job working in New York. And I did that for years to come. But the years went by, and I still owed a lot of money. I was trying to figure out how to pay all this money off. And I did pay it off. But I got married. And now I had kids. I was living in New York, and I was sitting there struggling to, you know, pay this and pay that. And I get a phone call, and it's Lawrence Young. He says, "You remember those lots you bought?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, you know, you never paid anything." I said, "Oh, God, that's all I need." Make a payment for a lot. But I, you know, at Little Cage, I said, "What about them?" He says, "What are you going to do with them?" I said, "I don't know what I'm going to do with them." "Why?" He said, "Would you be interested in selling them?" I said, "Well, how much could I get for them?" "Several $1,000s." So I said, "Well, I tell you, since I'm not going to be down there a while, I might as well sell it." So I sold for several $1,000s. I mean, it was the cleanest profit I ever made in my life, you know. But he had them in my name. You know, they signed the papers with my name. So I sold it. Jimmy sold his. Well, I think Jimmy stayed with a couple others. And it was amazing how I couldn't believe how that place was going. So then my wife and I started bringing the kids to the island all the time. But you know, this has always been an exciting place. Even during the Depression, things got very slow here. The railroad wasn't running. All you had was fishing, and you know, the sports fishermen and people were broke. People were very broke in the fishing. There were a lot of nice families here. It was a very nice life. And the only thing I regret is what the land company's called. Changed the name from Point Isabel to Port Isabel. You know, they're building this huge industrial center down here with the port and all that. So the port's another, I left that part about the port. I built the port of Brownsville and the Port Isabel. They built that in the 1930s. But This has always been a beautiful area. It's always been the breeze is nice. It's always been fun to come to. My grandmother and all of my family, the greatest joy for them in their 80s and 90s was to drive down to the point. They would come down and just park out there, looking at the breeze. It was lovely. It's a very beautiful place, and I think it's got a great future. And I think more and more people get to know about it and come down here. I see what they're doing. I go around the other day, what they're doing along the canals, and what they're doing up the bluff. They're fixing it for homes. There's a lot to be done yet. I don't know where the other causeway is going to go. I know it's a very contentious matter. I'm not going to get into that.
No.
But I certainly wouldn't want to see Pointersville hurt, because in my heart, I feel like we've been from Pointersville, and as I said, it was all the same community, from Pointersville all the way to Matamoros. If you haven't been to Matamoros lately, you ought to see what they're doing over there. It's impressive. They're restoring buildings right and left. I'd like to say a couple of things because some of you might be interested. Caminos are Real. That's an organization that takes care of tries to preserve the history of the border between Laredo and Brownsville. It's the secretary of the organization. And it's difficult trying to get people to restore and recognize what they have in their own buildings and in their culture. There's a lot of reasons. A lot of the old people, the old families are gone. They all remarried themselves. This has been around for 250 years. You think the history here started 250 years ago. During that time, the French owned Canada, Louisiana, and that's before the French and Indian Wars. French and Indian Wars, when these towns were already growing, George Washington joined Mr. Braddock, and they went in against the French and almost got wiped out, and they were, that's when I had all the battles of Ticonderoga, Lake Champlain, Lake George, trying to get into Canada, and that was known in this country as French and Indian Wars, and in Europe it's the 7-Year Wars, and finally ended up with Canada becoming part of Great Britain, and Louisiana being passed over to Spain from France to keep Britain from getting it. And this place was already around. The United States, it was 25 years before the Declaration of Independence was written. George Oglethorpe was just getting to Georgia. So you can have an idea of the time here. For 250 years, people have lived in this area, moved in this area, and you have families here that carry all the bloodlines from all these things, Anglo families and Mexican families, Mexican-American families, I should say. And a lot of this history is being written. So we try to preserve this. We have a Stillman Museum in Brown that's done a great job, and they have things with pictures going back to 150 years. That's fascinating. But Matamoros, we went to Matamoros and Caminos are Real and said, you talked to a bunch of merchants and said, you have to do something to preserve this place. They found it horrible. You get all these old buildings and they're falling apart. You haven't done anything. You have to preserve your history. It's a rich history. But see, Matamoros was vacated during the Mexican Revolution. All the people left. So the place would be going apart, like Kosovo was, So a lot of new people came in and they don't tie back to the old history. Some families did, but most people are newcomers. So we talked to them, and they said, yeah, that's good. I said, if you do that, you'll get some tourism. If you don't have some tourism, you should have pride in what you have. So we talked to them, we had meeting after meeting after meeting, several meetings, we weren't getting anywhere. Finally, Carlos Gutierrez, who works for Caminos of Rio, at one of the meetings, he brings this young lady who works in the planning department of Matamoros, and a young man, and they're both from Guanajuato. And they're both architects from the University of Guanajuato. And they were working on temporary type for the mayor of Matamoros. And he told them what we were trying to do, and they came. They said they thought our idea was great, but they said, to do it, you're going to have to organize a historical district. You have to set up a historical district in Matamoros. And to do that, you're going to have the city administration go along with it, and have to get approved by the state legislature in Victoria. So, well, let's do it. So we went to the city, and they said, yeah, do it. So we designated the area inside the old walls. Matamoros had walls around it. Up to the early part of the 20th century. These walls protected Matamoros from attack, from wars and all that. But that's where the money was, and that's where people used to come. So we said inside the wall, all the part of Matamoros inside the wall would be a historic district. So we got that done, and they approved it. We went to Victoria, and the governor approved it, and the legislature approved it. So now we had a historic district. We had to pass rules as to how to preserve it, what you could do, you can't tear the building down. A lot of people saw that coming, they went tore down the buildings right away, so nobody could tell them that they couldn't do it. So it was amazing, how people are. But they still, things continued, momentum continued. And so this young lady says, her name is Angelica Parra, she says, what you have to do now, the next step, is to take an inventory of the buildings we have here. And she said, the Mexican federal government, has a way of doing this. What they do, they inventory them as national historic monuments. And a national historic monument has to be a building or a location that has political significance way back, or it had architectural, it was very important. It was a building where somebody was born, some things, person was born, died, or lived, or some great action took place where something was done at one time. It has to fill all these requirements. He said, they're very, very tough. And I said, what's involved? He said, well, the city of Tampico had just finished doing this. They had just restored all the downtown in Tampico, all the main squares and all that. And they spent a year doing it, and they found themselves with 7 historical monuments. So how many we have around what? I don't know. We have to take things. So this was spring, and they went to work. And we had a meeting at Caminos de Rio in November in Matamoros, and we went there and they came to give the report. They came showing pictures. At that point, so up to now, we've only counted 180 historical monuments, and we're still counting. And we're still counting. Well, what happened in Matamoros, back in the 60s, 50s, modernized, and everybody wanted to be modern. You had all these old, beautiful old buildings with great facades. They tore the old facades down and put glass and all these other modern things up in the front, cement blocks and all that. And I guess they thought it was very nice. Terrible things were done in the 50s and 60s in this country and in that country also, even in Europe. But they passed the rule back to Matamoros, so we got this many. Everybody got excited. The city administration got excited. The governor got excited. So they started putting incentives to organize the trust, conservation trust. The conservation trust is working. So far, they've restored about 40 buildings. We got about 10 or 15 more underway. We got many more to do. If you go down the main square, you look around and you see all these old facades coming back. You see all the work's being done. So there's a lot of things being done here. What you're doing in Puerto Isabel with this thing is fantastic. I agree with everything in that museum except he says where the Mexican fishermen closed, ran all the fish out of the bay. Because I'll tell you this.
Better change that.
I was around then, and we had a lot more fish in those days than you do today. But to kill the fish with thousands and thousands of speedboats, really young, with propellers turning at the bottom, that's what's killed the fish. You could catch redfish out there all the time in those days. Everybody caught redfish in the trout. You don't do it today. So the fishing was better when you had that than it is today. And so I said, you ought to change that. Change that thing. But in any case,
I will change.
The point is, Bill, if you all live here, you're very fortunate to live here. I moved back. I lived in Europe, I lived in the Far East, I lived in South America, I lived in Connecticut, my wife's in Connecticut, and I told her we're going to move back to Brownsville. She almost died. She says, why?
Been there, done that.
She says, it says, you want to kill me? What's life? There's nothing left. What do you do after Brownsville? I said, nothing. We can go down there. It's a great place to live. Well, we had the reason I was able to do it, she wanted me to leave overseas and move back to New York. I lived in Connecticut. I didn't want to do it. I had a life. Well, I was going to go back to Connecticut, work in a home office in New York. I was a corporate officer, leading Carbide Corporation. I had a great job overseas. Nobody bothered me. I had full autonomy. And to be just another officer in New York was not what I wanted to do. But she convinced me we could because my youngest daughter couldn't speak English very well. And she said, they got to grow up in the States. They got to become American citizens. So we moved back to Connecticut. And I tell you, that was commuting to New York. You have no idea. So when she told me I was going to have to do that, I said, okay, on one condition. When I'm 65, we moved back to Brownsville. Of course, she said, that's way off. She and I went, oh, of course. And she's thinking, once he sees us and tastes Connecticut, he'll never want to go back to Brownsville. Well, I waited, I kept on talking about, we're getting closer, we're going to move back. When the time came, she almost died. She said, you're not serious. I said, of course I'm serious. We made an agreement. We got it. So she followed up the agreement. We moved back, and we've been here 11 years, I guess, 10 years. And it's great, and she loves it. But I have to get her out in the summertime. She has to leave in the summertime.
Too hot.
Too hot, she said. But it's a great place to live. I can't tell you. They have all these choices and places to go, and places to be. This is a very, very unique place, and it's interesting. It's got some character. You make a lot of places where nothing's ever happened. Nothing ever happened there. And I said, what do you do when you get old? You sit down. I could go to, I went to visit my in-laws. They have a place in John's Island. And I go and sit there and say, you want to come to John's Island? It's great. And so I went down to see what he was doing. Well, people our age, in the 60s and 70s. And they go out there and play about 9 holes of golf in the cart. They drive around the cart, play 9 holes of golf. And then at lunch they go in and limp in, to their houses and have a lunch that their wives don't want to make because it's a pain in the butt to have to make this lunch, and they give them something, some egg salad or something like that. Dine to maybe go to the club and get a better meal, and say that night came and go to a cocktail party. So they go to a cocktail party. Everybody dresses up and all look the same. They all wear the same suits, the same trousers. They all look the same and just look just like they did back in New Haven, Connecticut, where I live. Except now they're all getting punchier and older. And they sit there and they start having a couple of drinks. They're like, no more, you've already had 2, you can't have any more. You have plenty of hors d'oeuvres because I'm not fixing you dinner. And this goes on. And then the people come by to mow the lawns on Tuesdays, and on another day they come back and pick up the garbage. And, it is the most boring place. They never go anywhere, there's nothing to talk about, And all they talk about is the stock market, And as if they're going to starve to death someday, the stock market and the golf game. And none of them play golf very well. So I said, I used to come down here, I go to Matamoros, I used to meet with Matamoros, I meet with all these friends, we tell all kinds of terrible stories. I get involved in all this historical stuff. I go down to the island, I walk down the beaches, I don't know how to fish. I'm a sailor. I grew up sailing. I've sailed all my life. I've always had sailboats, but now my children won't let me have a sailboat now. I'm too old. I'm going to kill myself on sailboats. And I don't think I would, but I tell you, I just can't bend over and raise anchors and do all the stuff like I used to. But I can still sail a boat pretty well. But anyhow, that's really, it's fun to be here, and I sure have enjoyed being with you tonight because anybody who loves this place, I love, and I just think it's a terrific place to be. Thank you very much.
One of the generals or major that was killed before or at the same time that he taken from was killed. He started with a W and I can't think of the name of it at all.
Ringo, it was
No, Ringo was up farther.
Palo Alto. Palo Alto.
Yeah.
There was no general. The only general here.
The one that was killed, but he was hit by the cannon, and then he was beheaded again, and then they buried him.
That was a sergeant.
Okay, what was his last name?
I can't remember the sergeant.
It started with a W, and I can't remember.
I have no name, but I can't think of it right now.
Oh, all right. So you okay?
What happened?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Why didn't the ships go into the river instead of coming in?
Well, you had a bar there. You had a bar there. The ship couldn't cross the bar very well for the draft. But they would anchor on the other side, off the Mexican beach during the war.
Yeah, that's what I off of Baghdad.
That's right. But Baghdad grew up during the Civil War.
Right.
But when Mexico lost Port Isabel, they had no port. So that's how Baghdad came up.
But this has always been open then?
Well, yes, Vaso Santiago has been a good place to anchor for a long time. I don't think it has the depth it had at one time. I'm told that during the hurricanes, a lot of the hurricanes, a lot of it soaked it up. But Vaso Santiago has been a port for.
But the ships did come into the Laguna?
They came into the Laguna. They came right in. They came in right inside the jetty on the south bay. They all anchored. It was a protected area. And there they would offload onto lighters in the early days, bring it here and go by wagon to Matamoros. The steamboats came around about 1830. They started loading them on the steamboats and taking around. Steamboats go over the bar and up the river. About 100 miles, I think, by the river, all up around there, which would just turn around and around. But those steamboats made time. It was probably a lot more comfortable than riding a wagon. But there was another lady there in that battle.
Not the lady though.
The Great Western.
Yeah, Sarah.
Sarah Bogales.
Yeah, but she was a big gal.
Oh, they called her the Great Western because one of the great ships crossing the Atlantic in that day was called the Big Western. The Great Western. She was so large and all that, so powerful.
She could outdrink or outshoot.
Outdrink and outshoot everybody. Took care of the laundry, and she was there, cleaning out the cannon and every part of the cannon.
Advantage of it. But this guy was, they said that it could have been whatever this guy's name was. He was hit, and then they buried. They brought him in, and he was hit again, and then they buried him. And then,
bomb hit it, they bounced
yeah,
off
and
the
blew
grave.
off the whole thing again. And that's what they said, if Jacob Brown hadn't have got killed before him this last time, that it would have been it wouldn't have been Bronze
Well, you know,
Hill.
that's a very interesting site, by the way. That fort, a lot of it's still there. You can still see the outlines of the fortifications. And it's a National Historic Site. The federal government, National Historic Site. So the grounds are always the Texas Bronze. And so we're already finding ways to try to raise the money to restore it. Because, you know, that's where the Mexican war began. They fired in Fort Brown, Fort Texas.
Well, where did, when they, around 1900, when the revolution started in Matamoros, and they put that bridge across there, where was that actually at?
Well, that bridge was at the end of the Civil War. That was when they started evacuating the French troops.
And they put that pontoon bridge
Yeah,
across
the
there?
pontoon bridge to Brownsville. That was in 1865, or about 66, 67. They put it across and evacuate the French troops. The French boat, the steamboat, and they had a big one, came up, Matamoros, and they just loaded French Foreign Legion and all the other loading all over, taking them away.
Well, is it true that Pancho Villa was really there in Matamoros?
No, Pancho Villa wasn't there. Pancho Villa didn't stay at the Miller Hotel in Brownsville. He wasn't up in Lyford, you know, visiting some people there. Robert E. Lee never stayed in the Robert Lee house in
Really?
Grand City. It's a complete myth. There's nothing to it whatsoever. All these things are missing.
Well, he was so, I mean, he was here in the valley so much.
Oh yeah,
that
he
I
was here, and we have letters.
Yeah.
I saw a letter years ago about him writing Governor Sam Houston, you know, in 1859, talking about, you know, the commanding officer of Fort Brown, and he's saying something about that he got rid of Juan Cortina had been pushed aside, and now it was not safe and it was quiet, and he's been, he was to the Governor Samuel Houston, SAM, apostrophe L of Houston, and signed your obedient servant, you know, Robert E. Lee, Colonel, commanding the Fort Brown, Texas.
Well, is it true that he had the little affair with the senorita in Monterey?
Who that? Robert E. Lee?
No, Lee.
Lee?
Yeah.
I don't know. He didn't tell me about that. Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm sure there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, he was supposed to.
You know, I just read Undaunted Courage, you know, about Ambrose and Lewis and Clark expedition. And I made that trip this summer, went all along the trailer. You know, you got all those men, you got 31 men on the Discovery Group, Corps Discovery at Jefferson. And, you know, and those men, you know, with Indian women and every place else, I mean, and they had venereal diseases, they had everything like that, and they're passing around all over the place. They were all talking about it like it was nothing. And very well, the Lewis was trained to take care of it. They could give him mercury. You know, they treated mercury, and the mercury would stop the symptoms, and we get well. They said after the thing was over, within 10 years, most of the people had died. Mercury poisoning. But anyhow, so all kinds of things happen. You know, you have to understand, if you read these things, you tell, it was a very rough area to live in.
Well, when Taylor when Taylor had all this there at Aldo up there, and when Taylor confiscated all of Neil's stagecoaches to move everybody back and forth, and the guys didn't know how to drive those stagecoaches and everything, and Neil showed them how to do it, and he says, well, I'm leaving. And they said, well, you'll get killed. He said, no, I won't get killed. I'm a Mexican doctor.
Well,
so he left.
They were all nationalities.
Right.
You know, they were not Americans, they weren't Mexicans, they weren't French, they were just down here, you know, and all these other people were coming through, and they were making money any way they could.
You should tell them that the drive-in's going to open, the old drive-in is going to open.
Oh, it's going to open, that's October, they didn't say what year.
Right.
Well, they say that every year.
In November, they told me.
The building is almost complete.
Yes.
And it's a very interesting looking building. And they've done along the old style too.
Yeah. And around the plaza, all of you should go to Matamoros and go around the plaza.
And it's clean,
Yes, and they've all done new buildings there.
Yeah.
Is the U.S. bar still open?
No, unfortunately.
It's been
The
gone.
Texas bar too, and the Texas bar, the old Matamoros Cafe. Oh God, I remember those places. You know, we used to, kids, we used to go across, we were 13, 14 years old. They had about 15, 20 cents to go across the river. It cost a couple of cents to get across up here, what we paid, I can't remember. We go to Matamoros Cafe and sit up on the bench, you know. 13, 14 years old, so play the tacos. A bottle of beer, a little cajita, you know, about 10 cents, you know.
Gus, when did they actually, I know back in the 40s when they let the guys come over to work the fields because everybody was in the war, but when did the United States Customs put in that they had to have visas. When did that happen? Do you remember?
Well, that happened right after the war. We were all farming down there, you know, and we had no one to check us out.
Are you talking 50s?
Early, late 40s and 50s.
Okay.
I was farming in 48, 49.
Okay.
And in 50, I was farmed. And in July 50, a week after North Korea invaded South Korea, I was called back into active duty. I was in World War II, and I was called to the reserve. I was called back into active duty. And the crop was left out there.
Yeah.
I mean, but, you know, abandoned. And they wouldn't give me enough time. They wouldn't give me 3 weeks or 4 weeks to take the ticket. I took a big beating on it. But that's the way it was, you know?
But I couldn't remember what, I knew they let the boys, the Mexicans come across to work the fields, but I couldn't remember.
We used to sneak them across, you know, and go in the brush, and go out and pick them, and immigration would come out and pick them up, haul them off, they go back around, and the brush would pick them up, bring them back, and do it all over.
Yeah.
You'd find, I remember Mrs. Ray, Mrs. Sire Ray down Southmost, you know, she was quoted, Congressman Rooney from Brooklyn came down, he thought this was a disgrace, you know, he wanted to shut the whole thing down. And he wrote a report to the library, it's in that congressional report, that he was telling a case like Mrs. Sire Ray would get on top of the levee with field glasses. Whenever the immigration was coming, she'd start blowing a horn, and all the Mexicans would run across the Mexican side and wait for the immigration route.
And you did it.
We'd like to present you this from the Laguna Madre Museum Foundation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. And also, remember I told you about this is
Oh my God. Have you all seen this?
what this is. It says in the back. It says copy of an ad from Portisville Pilot, Wednesday, July 15th, 1942. And I presented to Augustin Celaya, Museum of Portisville College.
I do appreciate this. That's very good. That's my dad.
I came across it looking through this.
Well, good to see you, and thank you for coming.
Everyone, there's refreshments. Thank you for coming here.